All right. I wanted to welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is Eric. I work for Funly, and we provide the Funly suite of tools. I've been with the company for 4 years. The company's been around since about 2008, working with nonprofits on all aspects of nonprofits, not just volunteerism. So I've actually been working with nonprofits for quite some time now, even before I came here through a local one. Um, So today we, however, will be focused on Funly Connect and how it's going to be pertinent for you today in your working with HandsOn Jacksoville. So a couple things I wanted to say about the system is since we've been working with nonprofits for so long, we've worked very hard to make sure that this product is easy to use, quick, and efficient for the tasks that you're going to need to do on a day-to-day basis. So that's our goal, and I think we've achieved it. Um, so without further ado, I guess let's get started. The first thing I want to mention is you will all be getting an email in the next couple days to activate your account. It's going to be pretty straightforward and simple. That'll be done on, you do that on Friday, on Friday, yeah. And basically it's just going to be a link on where to log in along with a username and a temporary password. So not much more than that. Everything else will be handled for you. We'll cover today briefly how you can change that password when we talk about just updating your account information really very briefly. And the rest of the day we'll be talking about working with the systems and system and your kind of things you'll be doing day to day. So a quick run through of what we will be talking about to help guide you. We're going to start with navigation, kind of how to get around the system and working, with the different menu options. Then we're going to talk very briefly on configurations. There's not much we need to say there. Mostly I just want to make you aware of it. Then we're going to talk about application forms, which we're going to use in the next step, which is actually going to be creating what we call opportunities. And we'll talk a bit more about the definition of what that is when we get there. Then we're going to talk about managing opportunities, specifically managing volunteers and assigning volunteer scheduling and all that. Then we're going to talk about communications, reports, and then we'll go ahead and finish up and have a little bit of Q&A as needed. And then along the way, we'll also talk about working with volunteer records, editing them, creating new ones, and so on. So let's go ahead and get started. Once you've created your account, by the way, to log in, you can use the link that we provided. You can also go to the HandsOn Jacksoville public portal, which will be made available to you later. It's going to look like this. It might be a little bit different, but at the moment this is what it looks like. And you have an organization login button at the top. So that's where you can go ahead and log in. And then once you log in, you'll be on the dashboard. So let's close out that because I don't need it anymore. And actually, yeah. So on the dashboard, when you log in, you'll be given the basic statistics about your account. Active volunteers, opportunities, and some graphs. As time goes on, this will become more robust because we're always adding new functionality, new features as they're requested. But for the time being, it's just going to give you the basic lowdown of what your organization is up to. So let's talk about navigation. We have three menus that are going to be pertinent to us today. We have the quick menu, we're going to call it. We have the account menu, and we have the main menu. And we're going to use all of these real briefly today, some more than others. So I wanted to start with the quick menu. So everything we have in the quick menu is available to us in the main menu. But these are the kind of things that organizations do more frequently. So we have the ability to search for volunteers, including advanced search. We'll do that in a minute. We have, oops, clicked on something. We have the quick add menu. Oops, and that's what happens when you accidentally click on a search. So I accidentally just ran a search by clicking on one of my menu items, but I don't have any teams. We have, like I said, the quick menu. This is where we can add volunteers, opportunities. We'll talk about the differences between basic and advanced. Add hours. We can view recently visited volunteer records. We can see here that I have not recently visited any records. And recently visited pages. So for example, this is a way I can get back to the dashboard because that was where I just was. Or I can go to various other pages that I've been working on. So I can click on it and it's going to pop me back to the dashboard. So with the quick menu, there's two items I want to cover right now. One of them I kind of accidentally ran by clicking on active teams, and that's the search. So the quick search is just a quick way, I got somebody's name, I want to bring them up. So let's say I'm looking for Bob, and then hit enter, and it's going to bring up all the Bobs in the system. Now I believe I only have one Bob in this system. It's a pretty new system. I just made it for demo purposes a few days ago. So it's actually going to immediately bring up Bob. So there's no other Bobs in the system. Bob Smythe is my only option. So it's going to bring him up, and I'm going to get the contact details page, the volunteer details page. And from here I get a summary of everything going on in his record. And then from here I can also edit and a few other things. But maybe I want to do something a bit more advanced. So I can click on my quick search and actually go to advanced search. So let's run that real quick. So here we have our advanced search page. I have the first name and last name fields, kind of things I could do in quick search. But I can also now start looking at email addresses, PIN numbers, postal codes, zip codes, and other criteria in the system. This does include skills. So I could pull up all the volunteers with a given skill. In this case, let's go ahead and let's say, well, let's pull up all the guys. So gender, in, male. And then I could search, add other criteria to this search, but let's keep it simple for today's purposes. And then hit search. And this will bring up a list of all my volunteers that happen to be male. And I should have at least 2. I believe I tagged that for 2 of them. So Bob Smythe and Larry Shaw. From here, I can take action on them. I can select somebody and communicate to them all, send an email, or I can edit if I wanted to. So that is quick search and advanced search. Now let's also talk about adding volunteers. So we're going to do opportunities via a different mechanism later. But for our purposes, let's go ahead and add a volunteer. So as volunteers sign up online through HandsOn Jacksonville, they'll get added to your system. So no action actually needs to be done there. But occasionally, someone will send you a piece of paper, a physical form, or they might talk to you, and you decide that you're going to add them to the system. In those scenarios, you can go ahead and use the quick add menu and add volunteer. We'll see another way to add a volunteer later that's a little bit more truncated, but this will give you the full add edit screen for a volunteer. So fill in all the information you have. The only required fields are first name and last name, but if you have an email, I definitely recommend putting that in as well. So let's put in a Robert Smith. And, if we have anything else for him, gender, birth date, all that fun stuff, we can go ahead and put it in. So I'm going to keep it simple for purposes today and just go ahead and hit save. There's more information that we can track, such as the programs are associated to something we call custom data sets, emergency contact information, and a few other items. So I recommend checking those out, but we're not going to cover them right now. There is one thing more, though, I do want to cover on this page, and that is the Send Account Setup link. So ideally, a volunteer will be coming in online, but like I mentioned, sometimes they'll give you physical paperwork. When that happens, we still ideally want them to have an account with your agency and with HandsOn Jacksoville as a whole. So what we can do is we can actually check this box, and then when we hit save, that volunteer will be sent a link to take control of their account. So going forward, they can update their information, they can say what skills they have, so on and so forth. And also when they start applying online, which is what we'd like them to do, it'll remember their information. As we saw earlier on the HandsOn Jacksonville public portal, there was also a login for volunteers. So, and that, thank you, Bonnie pointed out to me, that is only when you enter their email. So you won't be able to do that if you don't give them an email. So thank you, Bonnie, for pointing that out to me. I almost forgot. So that is creating volunteers and searching volunteers. So those are the only 2 items I'm going to cover today from our quick menu. But as you saw, there's a couple others. From here, I'm going to move to the right, and I'm going to talk very briefly about the account menu. So in particular, what I want to mention in the account menu is the My Account option. With this My Account option, you can it'll basically show you your organization's information, and this is where you can create additional users for your account, update your credentials, your username and password, and create what we call application roles. So I'm just going to mention those today. Like some of the other features in the system, I'm just going to either mention them or kind of skip over them to focus on what we really need to cover today. But I did want to make sure you know about credentials so that when you get your temporary password, you know you can update it to something a little easier to remember. So let's go back. And that takes us now to the main menu. So everything we have done so far, we can do from the main menu. And this is going to have more things that we can't do with the quick menu. So our search and our add volunteer are here, and a couple of other items which we will touch on. So the next item I wish to touch on is configurations. And we're going to say very briefly here. Excuse me. Okay. There's a question, but I'm going to put it aside for now. So configurations, we're going to touch very briefly on here. There isn't really anything here you need to do, but I do want to at least make you aware of it. So later on, when we're creating our opportunities, we're going to be able to set search tags that will allow volunteers to search online to find those opportunities more easily. And so the system comes with most of the ones you probably need, but if you need to, you can create more. We have activity types, population served, age group, skills, age group served, and causes. So I'm not going to go into these right now, I just want to make you aware of them. We also have a feature, and I'm just going to show it, I'm not going to go into it right now, called custom datasets. This is a way to expand the system, and basically, for our purposes, the way to ask questions for our application forms. So name, email, phone number, those are the kind of things built into the system, but you may have questions specific to your opportunities and needs, and custom datasets is how we can create those questions and group them together into what we call a dataset. So here I, for example, have demographic information, and then I'm asking about ethnicity, household income, marital status, whatever is pertinent to your organization. So just want to mention these and that they exist. They're pretty easy to work with. But for our purposes today, we're going to move on. So that's configuration. Like I said, not too much there that we need to worry about. Now we're going to get into the actual day-to-day operations. So when we put our opportunities online, we're going to have volunteers applying for them. So ideally, that's what we want. And when they apply, since they've got an account, we're going to get certain basic information about them. Name, email, so on. Not all that was required during registration. So what we can do is we can create application forms that we can attach to our opportunities. So here I've created two of them. I've got a general form and a tutor form. Pretty straightforward to make a new one. Just add new form down here in what we call the action bar. Never really need to know it's called that. That's what it's called. A variety of actions that we can do on any given page will be found down here. So create new, add new opportunity, edit volunteer. So if you're ever uncertain what do I need to do on a page, it's usually down here at the bottom. Some of the configurations are line items, but we'll put that aside for now. So let's go ahead and edit one of these forms. Let's edit our tutor form. So I'm going to go ahead and edit it. And here is our form. Here I've set up the form to have name, address, the custom data set I created called tutoring information. Now this particular data set is a staff use only data set, meaning that only you see it. So that's one of the fun things you can do with your data sets for your forms is you may not want the volunteer to fill it out. You may be reserving that for your own information gathering purposes. So tutoring information was such an example. Emergency contact, and then I can add more. Just by going ahead and clicking on add field. So add field, and then pick what I want to add. So maybe I want to know what their gender is, because maybe I like to match certain genders with certain gender students for tutoring purposes. So just click on gender, and it adds it in. So if you need to remove a section, say, you know what, in the end, I actually don't need to know about this, I can delete it with the little negative sign. I might decide, you know what, I want this to be required information. So you can edit it and mark it as required. So now when this form is filled out, they have to enter this information. You can also do that with your data sets when you configure them. You can make them required. Always be careful with required, because if it's required, it could, if they don't have the information, prevent them from continuing. So just be aware of what you add. Okay, so I'm actually not going to make that required. I'm all done. And then, as I mentioned before, if there's an action, it's usually down here in the bottom right, save. It'll save my form, and I'll get a notice as such. So that's application forms. You can have as many application forms as you need. And as we'll see later on, each opportunity can have its own form. So that actually brings us to our next topic, moving right along. We're going to go ahead and look at our currently configured opportunities and create more opportunities. So our opportunities from the main menu, and here's our current list of opportunities. I have 2 active and 1 inactive. So when we're done with an opportunity, we can inactivate it and basically tuck it aside. We're archiving it. So I don't need to see this inactive one because I'm not working with it anymore. What I'm about to do down here with Add Basic and Add Advanced is the same as what I can do from Add Opportunity Basic and Add Opportunity Advanced in the quick menu. But for our purposes today, I wanted to go the long way. So another thing I was actually asked to point out, and it's a cool thing to point out, is we can change how we view these opportunities. So I can actually view it not just as a list, but as from a calendar view. So I wanted to make sure everybody knows about this. We can see it from the calendar view and kind of see what's going on a given day. Right now I'm defaulting to a week view. I can also switch it up to a month. Or if I'm particularly busy, I can do it on a daily basis. And this is going to tell me the location, the venue. Currently set, I have all mine set to default, the name of the shift, the time of the shift, the volunteers, and I can add volunteers from here, and how many volunteers out of how many are out of the maximum do I have for that shift. So we'll talk more about shifts in a moment, but I wanted to show this off to y'all. So let's switch back to list view. And let's continue. So here I have two opportunities. I have a basic and an advanced. So what are the differences between the two? Well, the name kind of gives us an inclination. Basic is the most basic. So if you want to keep things simple, basic is the way to go. And we'll see that configuration in a minute. And then advanced is if we want more advanced scheduling options specifically. So let's start with a basic, and let's create it real quick, and then we're going to switch to an advanced and talk about more advanced scheduling options. You may not need those scheduling options. A lot of organizations can get by with just the basic, but I do want to make sure you're aware of them. So let's add basic opportunity. So for our purposes today, let's just make up an opportunity. Let's say so my example in my head, let's say an arts organization, because I've worked with those quite greatly. And we need people to come and clean up the grounds. We have a lot of sculptures and statues, maybe we have extensive grounds, and we need people to help us keep them clean. So that's going to be our opportunity. So for our example. So let's start filling in what we need for this opportunity. First off, what is the name of the opportunity? So what is an opportunity? An opportunity is what a volunteer signs up for. It's kind of like a job. It is, a job posting in a simple form. So we want to make sure that the name for our opportunity is clear and concise and lets the person have a sense of what they'll be doing. Now we'll be able to put more details about what they're doing later on. We'll see that in just a second. But we want our opportunity name nice, clear, and concise. So we might have something in our example here of grounds cleanup. There we go. Grounds cleanup. But what it's going to be is going to be specific to your organization. So it might be tutoring third graders at JFK High School or something of that nature. So grounds cleanup. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and say winter. So I'm going to restrict this to the people for the winter time. Next, opportunity owner. For the most part, you can leave this alone and just leave it as me. That's just going to be you. But you can assign control of this opportunity to somebody else. So if a volunteer emails the opportunity owner, it goes to that person. We then have the location. So most of our locations will probably be at the central office, central location for the organization. Sometimes they'll be at other locations. For basic opportunities, we just have one location we need to worry about. We're going to see later with advanced that we can do multiple locations. And right now it's going to default to the information that I put under my account for my organization as a whole. So that's why it's defaulting to our offices here in Rohnert Park. I can go ahead and change this. So edit and change the address, and I get a lovely map. This will actually show on the public site. So I'm going to close that out. I'm going to go ahead and change this to main office. There we go. And save. Okay. Positions, we're not going to, is basically different roles within the opportunity. We're not going to worry about that right now. We'll talk a bit more about that in advanced. Then we have our details. This is what goes on the public site. This is our sales pitch, as you might call it. This is basically your chance to tell the volunteer what you're doing, why it matters, why we need your help. So it's a job posting, I guess you could say. So make sure this is nice, clear, and concise. Doesn't need to be too detailed. We have search tags to help us out with that a little bit later on, but make sure it does let the volunteer know, what they'd be up to and what's required of them. And then that brings us to scheduling. So over here on the right, with a basic opportunity, our scheduling is very simple. We'll see later with advanced, we can get a bit more intricate. So we have two types of scheduling for a basic opportunity. One time. This is great for one-time events, parties, fundraisers, festivals, things like that. Concerts, occasionally. This basically says, on this day, we need a volunteer. The other option is ongoing. And this basically means from some date to some date, we're not specifying the exact days of the week, for example, we need volunteers. So for our grounds cleanup, for the winter, we need volunteers from the beginning of January up until the end of February. Nothing too fancy there. And then our shift. I'm going to play with more of these later, but this is basically where we say what time do we need them to show up. So I'm just going to leave it as default shift, and we need them to come between, say, noon and 3:30. 30, there we go. Alternatively, we could say time is flexible, and that basically means they show up at their leisure between these date range, and they do their hours as needed, kind of an ad hoc. So that would be more for, where you don't have set times, people come and go. So actually for our grounds, let's go ahead and do that. Time is flexible. So our volunteers come when they can, and they leave when they're done, depending on what's needed. In a similar vein to that kind of ad hoc, kind of things can be a little nebulous, there's the option to make a virtual opportunity. This basically means there is no physical location, and that the volunteer is probably doing things online, maybe at their home, maybe online via doing data entry. So that's a case where you might actually use time is flexible. We just need volunteers to do data entry for us. Okay, so that's our first step, basic information for a basic opportunity. We've now got all the basics that we need, and we can go on to search tags and various other settings under requirements. So let's save it next. All right, so this is our requirements page. The top section is going to be our search tags. The bottom section is settings. There are a few settings I will be skipping for our purposes today. You can basically just leave them as their defaults. So we have our search tags up here. Most of them are pretty straightforward, but I do want to define cause, activity type, and skills. So a cause is basically the greater cause, the greater issue that's being addressed by this opportunity. So I'm an arts organization, so by helping with this, you're helping arts and culture as a greater cause. If you're doing tutoring, you're helping children and youth education. So this will often be kind of closely tied to the mission of your organization. Next, we have the activity type. What are you actually doing in support of that cause? So, gardening and planting, sure. That might be the activity type that you're doing, with grounds cleanup, or you might have created your own activity type that fit a bit more closely. And then what skills would you possibly need to do that activity? So in a cause of youth education, your activity type would be something like tutoring, and your skills would be things like the various subjects, math, science, English, or other language, things of that nature. So they all kind of support each other. And then our various search tags over here are usually pretty self-explanatory. Who is actually going to be helped by it? You may not always use these. So the age group being helped, if you're working with children, this is applicable. If you're doing grounds cleanup, it is not. Population, once again, not applicable for grounds cleanup, but applicable for tutoring. And then gender. Probably not going to be used very often unless you're like a women's shelter or a men's shelter or similar. And then the age of the volunteer. I often say this is the most important of search tags, and I hold to that statement. You will often have volunteers who maybe are children, teenagers, doing volunteer service for their schools or the Boy Scouts or their volunteer service organization that they work for, are part of, like a club. And so they'll go looking for opportunities that are applicable for their age group. And a lot of times I've found that organizations don't set this, or they set it inappropriately. And so it makes it harder for volunteers to find appropriate opportunities for themselves or for their children. So the only required of your search tags is causes. The other are optional, but I strongly recommend selecting your age groups for the volunteer. So that's search tags that I'm going to cover right now. We're going to skip teams for the time being. Down here, we have the ability to select the form that we created earlier, so that general form that I created. I can even edit and add one from here if I want to. And then these settings we're going to go ahead and ignore for now. This is for an add-on that we're not talking about today, and we probably always want to leave this on. And I'll show you actually the feature this interacts with later. So that's our search tags. You can also make up your own search tags over here. So I could say grounds maintenance. I always spelled that word wrong. I spelled it right here, enter, and it adds it as a search tag. So you can also customize your search tags as needed. And then we have some settings. So let's talk about these settings. Most of them kind of say what they do. So when a volunteer signs up online, in a minimal sense, all they would do is sign up, and then you handle everything from there. But since we're doing stuff online, let's perhaps see if we can get the volunteer to help us and do a little bit of the bookkeeping on our behalf, reducing staff time. So these are some really good features to help reduce your staff effort. The first one is, and I'm not going to do these in order, is approval required? So that's not really, so that's going to actually make more effort for you, technically. But when they apply, are they immediately considered a volunteer? Or, since we have it on, will you need to vet their application? So I have this on right now. I can turn it off. Depends on what we need. Tutors, definitely want to vet. Grounds maintenance, probably don't need to vet it as closely. We just need people. So, different scenarios where that might be needed. Can a volunteer say when they're going to show up, or is that reserved for an admin? So if scheduling is very important to you and very intricate, you might not want to give them this power. But if it's not as intricate, or you just need to know, hey, did someone say they're going to show up, you can give that power to them. We're going to see scheduling in a little bit, but it's going to look about the same for the volunteer. And then can a volunteer log their own hours, and then you just have to say yes or no to them. So once again, this can take some of that work off of you. So these are highly useful, and I usually recommend probably keeping them on depending on your needs. There's one feature we are not going to cover today, and it's actually called orientations and trainings. So there is the option to configure basically a class, a training, an orientation that a volunteer will have to attend in order to be considered a volunteer. So sometimes it's just a volunteer welcome event they have to go to before we consider them volunteer, where they can get the information about what we do. So I'm not covering it today. I wanted to make you aware of it. And this is just simply where you'll say, yes, we have an orientation, and which one. I don't have any configured in this system. So just want to make you aware of it, but we're not going to cover configuration there right now. All right, so for our basic opportunity, I know I took a lot of time talking about it, but it's pretty quick to get through them. We're actually done. The only thing we have left now is to publish our opportunity to HandsOn Jacksoville, or in my case, just a generic volunteer action center that I created. So save and next, or save only, depending on what you're up to. And we're going to come to the publish page. So not much to do here. Ignore this is my name. It should say the organization's name. So what you're going to do here is you're going to select HandsOn Jacksoville. I don't believe they have any programs at this time, so there's nothing you need to check there. That won't even show up. And then just say publish, unpublish. This may shortly just say save for simplicity purposes. And now, depending on the configuration on Jacksonville's side, you are posted and accepted and published. If this says pending, that means that it's being reviewed. So it might be something that requires review. It may not, depending on the situation. But at this time, I believe it should just post. So at this time, if I went to the Volunteer Action Center or HandsOn Jacksoville's public portal, I would see my opportunity. And that's that. Pretty straightforward and simple, we hope. All right, so now that we've done a basic, let's go back to our opportunity list. Here is our grounds cleanup winter opportunity that we've created. And let's go ahead and talk about an advanced opportunity. So really the only difference here is scheduling. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of keep it a little on the high level and just look at a opportunity I created last night called Gallery Docents. So I'm just going to go ahead and edit this one. And we're going to skim through it. The basic information page has only two differences from the basic information page we saw on a basic opportunity. We now can have multiple locations, and we do not do scheduling on this page. So if you have an opportunity, it's the same opportunity but at two different locations. Maybe you have two facilities, what have you, two different schools you're working with. You can set them up as two different locations with add location. Requirements, same exact configuration there. And then we have scheduling. So this is where it differs. So scheduling will depend on what you're up to. We have one time, as we did before. We also have ongoing, as we did before. But now we have three new options. So we're going to go through them really quick. And the really one that you probably need to use is weekly. So if you're going to use advanced scheduling, which isn't required, like we saw, the first thing you do is say, what location am I scheduling for? And the type of schedule. So think of your schedule as, when is the store open? What days of the week, or days of the month, or erratic dates for other, will this location be available? And then we're going to create shifts, which are the actual times. So I used to work in retail long ago, so that's what always comes to my mind. So I use that as my example. It's kind of like the store is open Monday through Sunday. So our weekly schedule would be every Monday through Sunday. But you had different people working different shifts. Some people did the morning shift, some the midday, and some the afternoon. So that's kind of the model that sticks in my head. I like to mention it because I think it might help people kind of grasp it. So let's do weekly. Well, as we had with ongoing, say the date range. So if our opportunity is representing the month, the quarter, the year, I'm going to specify that date range. And then I say what days of the week. So I might say, well, this is a schedule that represents just the month of February. So maybe this opportunity is just for the month of February. And it's every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and not Sunday. Or it's going to be the first Sunday. So we can kind of mix and match it as needed. We can do alternating, stuff like that. So you'll set what days of the week it's going to be. For monthly, it's based on the day of the month. Don't see this used very often. And then other is for what I call erratic schedules. Basically where it's not consistent. Maybe you're a education organization and you do astronomy nights. And so it's going to be based on when the moon is new. And thus there's no moon, you can see the stars nice and cleanly. And that's going to move around in the month and the day of the week. So that might be an erratic schedule, thus other. Okay, but let's focus on weekly. So set your days of the week, and then you're going to hit save. And it's going to add it over here. So here we have a schedule I created last night. That is for the entirety of the year. That's every Monday through Saturday. And then we have some shifts. Now, before we talk about shifts, one thing I do want to mention is because of holidays, sometimes you need to put exceptions, days when this won't happen, and that's where date exception comes into play. Just state your date range, hit add. Holidays, days off, things like that. So once you create your schedule for that location, we go ahead and we create the shifts. So when is that location actually going to have people show up? So here I've got two schedules created. I'm going to create a third one just now. I have a weekday morning, so it's every day of the week, not Saturday, from 10 to noon. And the weekday afternoon, every day of the week, not Saturday, from noon to 2. So we have a gap here, because here we state Saturday as well. So let's create the shift for Saturday. So shifts are pretty straightforward, like I said. They're just what time will the person show up. So add shift. By the way, when you save your schedule for the first time, it'll automatically pop this up. And we saw this screen before. well, similarly before. So shift name, this should be nice and clear when you have multiple shifts. So this will be the weekend shift. Let's just say we have only one. What days of the week? We've already done Monday through Friday. Let's select Saturday. And then the time. Once again, we can do flexible or set a fixed time. So let's say our weekend shift is from 11 till 2:30. There's 30. There's 30. So I set our times. Something we didn't talk about before was on that basic page, we can create what we call positions. Most of the time, you're probably not going to need multiple positions, but sometimes you do. So for example, if we had different kinds of docents in our gallery, so this is an arts organization again still, we would create different positions for those different kinds of docents. We only need one opportunity. They could show up at the same times and shifts and what have you, but we might need different kinds of docents. So we might have a gallery docent that just kind of wanders, and maybe we have a tour docent who actually guides tours. So when we create those positions on basic, in advanced opportunities, we can say what positions go to what shifts and how many we can take at maximum. So it's not minimum, it's maximum. And then save and close, or save and add new. And we can do more shifts. So here I now have 3 shifts. And that's that advanced opportunity in a nutshell. Everything else is the same as basic. So like I said, most of the time you're probably just going to need basic for most things, but know that advanced is available. Alrighty. So, apologize, it took a little longer than on that I had intended. Let us now talk about the day-to-day operations of managing volunteers for an opportunity. Now, what I'm going to show you here is just one way to do it. There are other ways to do some of the tasks I'm showing. As we saw from a volunteer's record, when we went on it very briefly, maybe I didn't point it out, actually, now I think about it. There was an assign button, so we can actually assign a volunteer to an opportunity from their record. But we can also do it here. So when a volunteer applies online, they're going to, depending on your settings, either automatically show up as a volunteer or show up as awaiting approval. Now at this time, I have no volunteers awaiting approval. If I did, I'd have 2 buttons here that say approve or reject. And if I approve it, it would then say, do you want to look at the form, if there is one? And then you can say yes or no and review the form as appropriate. And until you actually hit the final approve on that form, you still can back out. So just be aware of that if you use that setting. Otherwise, they're going to get added automatically to the volunteer list. Now, what happens if we're doing something manually? Let's say they gave us, once again, a paper form, and we need to add the volunteer. Well, our first step, it can be to add the volunteer like we saw earlier. Or we can just add the volunteer as we need them, kind of an ad hoc add volunteer. So to add a volunteer to an opportunity, we're going to go ahead and either click Assign Volunteer or Assign Volunteer over here. So let's click that one. And we're going to select from our previously existing volunteer. Here I am. So I can assign and then assign myself. Or if they don't exist, we can make them up. So John, I think I already did a Smith. John Johnson. There we go. Oop, what'd I do? I got ahead of myself. Anyway, John Johnson. Okay, so as I started typing, it's doing that it's doing a search to find my volunteer in the system. But if the volunteer is not there, I don't actually get a drop down like we saw with my name. So when I click out, it's going to let me add John Johnson. Now this is truncated, so there's not as much information. So I just put his name, and if I have it, email, and save. We'll ignore this setting for now. Save. John Johnson has now been added as a volunteer in my system. I can search him, I can update him later, and I can now assign him. So this is just one of those things to help you keep moving in the day and not get bogged down in entering all your volunteers and then managing them. So you can add them as you need to. And then close. So now our gallery docent is up to 3. There was 1 before, and I can now continue on. So that's adding volunteers and creating them as we need them. From here, we are going to need to schedule them and then start logging hours. If we're doing orientations, then we'd have to handle that as well, but we're not going to do that today. So to manage the volunteers for an opportunity, I can just click on the number, or I can come over here and manage volunteers, which is what I'm going to do. So here I have it, the Manage Volunteer screen. And everything I need to do is actually going to be told to me on this next step column. So we don't have you going all over the system to take your next action. We've put it in this nice easy column so that you just go bam, do this, bam, do the next thing. So whatever that next step will be told here. So if I had to RSVP them for an orientation, that'd be my next step. If I have to mark them as having attended that orientation, that would be my next step. Once all that's out of the way, scheduling becomes my next step. Now if a volunteer has their account, and you've allowed them to do scheduling on their dashboard when they log into their account, they will see their opportunity gallery docents, and they will see their own next steps. So if you allow them to do scheduling, they will have a scheduling link they can click, and they're going to get a similar pop-up to what you're going to see here. So let's schedule John Johnson. Scheduling. And we see a lot of the fields that we had before. So our first step, venue. Where is he going to volunteer? This is why you usually want to set something other than default. I'm just moving quickly. So instead of default, you'd probably have, downtown office, crosstown annex, something nice and clear. You might even put the street address, it's up to you. Something so the volunteer will recognize it and that you can recognize it. So select a location. Then we're going to say what shift will they do. So this is where the naming of your shifts will be important for the volunteer. If they see weekday shift, morning shift, they know exactly what that is. I'm going to be volunteer on weekday mornings or Monday morning, depending on how specific you want to be. So let's do the weekend shift. And then position. What job will they do? So if you have multiple positions, they can select different jobs. If you're doing like a tax preparation program, like United Way does, you might have greeters, interpreters, site coordinator, tax preparers. Or you might make this the different subjects that they could tutor in or teach. So we select our location, our shift, our position, and then the system will automatically fill in the default start date, end date, start time, end time for that shift. And the volunteer can say, you know what, I can only do Saturdays or only specific days from the calendar. So they can get erratic if they need to, but generally speaking, most of the time you want to schedule just on the day itself. If for some reason they say, you know what, I can't do the full year, I can only do it until, say, August 1st, because after that point I'm having a kid or something, I don't know. Then they can change that, you can change that, and if you've got an agreement with them that says they're only going to be there till 2 instead of 2:30, they can override that as well. So this will show in their record as being their scheduled time versus the shift time. You won't need to know those terms very much at all, but they're there. And that's scheduling. So for the most part, like you saw, all I have to do is set the stuff up here, set my days and save, but sometimes you can override. And then save. So you might be wondering, what's the save and add new button all about? Occasionally, you may have volunteers doing different shifts for a single opportunity. So that's where save and add new would come into play. I save this shift, add another one. So if I'm doing the weekday morning and the weekend shift, totally legitimate, 2 different schedules. So just wanted to let you know about that. So now John Johnson has been scheduled, and now we can log hours. There are 2 ways we can log hours for our purposes today. I can click on log hours, select their assignment, so default location, doing the weekend shift as a volunteer. They may have multiple, and then give a description and the number of hours they did on that day. So on the first, he did, 3 hours? 3 hours. And he was doing guided tours. Save and close. So pretty straightforward, and just go down the line. Now one thing you might be thinking, well, I don't want to calculate that. Because you saw there's a gap, there's a pause for me for a second. I had to do the quick math of 11 and 2 o'clock becomes 3 hours. So sometimes a quicker way to log hours, especially if you're doing it on a daily basis, is with the attendance option. And we saw that during requirements. There's a little checkbox saying automatically calculate hours when you mark someone has attended. And that comes into play here. So here, I can go ahead and select a date and simply say that the person showed up. So let's go ahead and let's just pick a date, say the 17th, get attendees for that day. And Charles Denton here, I forget what I scheduled then, has 2 shifts. He does the morning and then the afternoon. And I can say, you know what, he's actually shown up. Check in. He's attended. Or I can mark him as a no-show as well. And that becomes reportable later. And so now if I go to manage attendees, Charles Dent has another 2 hours on his schedule of hours. So that's a nice, quick, easy way to log hours in the system versus actually clicking on log hours. It's up to you which one works best for you. Alrighty, so that brings us to the end of managing volunteers. Now, there are other ways, like I said, to come at these, but for our purposes today, those are probably the easiest ones. So, back, and as a reminder, to get to the volunteer list, excuse me, the opportunity list that we see right here, we go to main menu, our opportunities. Previously, it would be on the design application form and configuration. All right, so I'm going to pause there for just a second and then move on. So communications is the next item I wanted to talk about. So through the system, you have the ability to send communications to your volunteers. We kind of saw that very briefly when we did a volunteer search and came up with a couple of volunteers. We saw that we can select them either individually or as a mass, and we can communicate with them or email them. So email is what you think it is. It's just a basic email like what you would send from, say, Outlook. Communicate, though, is a much more robust feature. So what communicate is it's basically, I don't want to call it newsletter, but it's basically bulk email. Similar in concept to newsletters. You can use it as a newsletter, but it's a way to mass email your volunteers and send them updates, information, and what have you, and track statistics. So we have 2 ways of starting a communication. The first one is actually from this screen. We can go to the drop-down for a given opportunity and go communicate. This results in a communication being created specifically for that opportunity and its volunteers. So it's basically a pre-search. It's you don't have to go and say, well, I only want the volunteers for this opportunity. It's going to do that search for you. Alternatively, we can go to the main menu, communication history, or create new. So if we go to communication history, we will see all the communications we've previously sent or have been working on. I guess I didn't finish that one. Or we can create a new one. So this create button, the create communication button, and the create new option in the menu are the same thing. So let's create new from communication history. And I do apologize, I am actually going a little longer than I intended to, but I will still have time for the end for questions. So here we go ahead and we say the name of the communication for our internal purposes, sender name, so that'd be probably the same name of your organization or maybe you as a person. Sender email, if they hit reply, where is it going? Where is it going to look like it came from? The subject, so subject line of the email. What kind of recipient? So it's going to be volunteer in all cases for y'all, for you. And then we pick our template. So if anyone's ever used MailChimp, the concept is very similar. You create your templates ahead of time, or right here if we need to, and the template will actually be the content. And there's some placeholders and stuff like that. So here I have my reminder notice, and I can go ahead and edit it, or I could create a new template. So edit, and it's going to bring up the editor. So we're going to go skim really quickly through the editor. Basically, up here we can edit the name of the newsletter template, the template, and here we have various sections. We can edit them and edit the content. Close out, and we can add new widgets for new content, and then save. So, I'm not going to go into the details there. Close that out, and then once we're done, save and proceed. So let me fill this in really quickly. Invitation, so it's the invitation, sender name is, that's my generic one, actually, let's subject, you're invited, and let's just use our reminder notice. We can also put small attachments on, by the way. So save and proceed. I got everything in there. Good, I did. And then we can select our recipients. So if you want to email everybody in your system possible that can receive it, the system will already have done a little basic searching for you. All you have to do is hit search, and all possible recipients, in my case it should be like two, will be able to receive it. Otherwise, those search criteria we saw in advanced search, we can use those to limit it down. If you came in from the opportunity, it will have already selected just the people for that opportunity. And then you can add just raw emails for other folk, for other people. Save and proceed. And then send yourself a test email. Always recommend that. Make sure it looks good. And then send. When you send, you can send it immediately, send now, or send on a specific date and time. So I'll go ahead and send this immediately. And we're all done. Now our communication has been sent out. Once it's sent, everything's completed. This is a demo system, so I'm not sure I can actually send them. You'll get an option that says View Summary, and you can actually see statistics, open rates, stuff like that on your communications. So I want to make sure you all knew about that. So lastly, but definitely not least, is reporting. So for our purposes today, we're just going to talk very briefly about default reports. These are reports that come with the system, and you can execute them and get data sliced and diced as needed. So we have a variety of reports that cover pretty good selection of scenarios. We always create more. If you have any requests for reports that do not exist that you think that others would love, go ahead and let HandsOn Jacksoville know, and that can be made possible. So I'm just going to very briefly to execute. Just click on execute. That'll put it in the default format, which I believe is PDF. You can execute in other formats, like the much loved Excel, to play with it in that format if it makes sense. And you can also schedule and copy them to your as default, as custom reports, and play with them there. So most of the time, for your purposes, default reports are what you're going to want. So I went ahead and generated one real quickly beforehand of what default report. This is the hours by opportunity report, and it tells me that for a given opportunity food packing, we have a volunteer who did 0 hours, so they haven't actually done anything yet. And we have Charles Dent, who's got a number of hours entries on given days. And then Eric Metzler hasn't done any yet, so we have a total of 0 hours for those opportunities. So just an example of the kind of reports that can be run. Okay, don't need that anymore. And that's that. So that was our introduction to Funly Connect. As we saw, we can do a fair amount of things with not too much hassle. No hassle at all, I think. We can navigate the system quickly and do various common tasks with our quick menu. We can update our account with My Account from the account menu. We have the main menu to do our full navigation of the system, including some basic configurations as needed, the creation of application forms, the creation and management of volunteer opportunities and the volunteers within them. We can run the reports. We can add and search for volunteers, and we can send bulk communications. So if you have any questions, I'm going to open it up in just a minute for as long as you want. Otherwise, if you have any questions or issues, you can always contact HandsOn Jacksoville with any questions or issues that may arise. Yeah, it was glad I had this opportunity to present to you today. And I'll go ahead and stop the recording in just a second, and we'll go ahead and open up for questions.